Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Saskia Bricmont. I'm member of the European Parliament, co-chair of the Children Rights Intergroup, and I'm co-hosting this important event today with Defense for Children International. While we wait 5 more minutes for everybody and all participants to connect, I will share with you a few technical informations. First of all, this webinar is recorded and might be used for communication purposes. And if the times allows it, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of our webinar to allow you to ask all your questions to our speakers. But if we don't have much time left, then I would kindly ask you to share your questions through the chat. There is a chat on the right side of your screen, and you can ask your question to the speakers or share your comments, your thoughts. Do not hesitate to use that channel. Thank you already to all our speakers and Manfred Nowak for joining us. It's really great to have you with us today because it's a very important topic to us. We will wait for 4 little minutes because we had more than 150 people registered for today's event. So I think we can wait a little bit for them to join. So we'll see each other in 3 minutes. Okay, I am back. I think we can start this webinar today. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy we could finally organize our webinar together with Defense for Children International because it was initially planned in March physically, but we had, of course, to cancel it due to the pandemic. So I'm really glad to organize it today and virtually, also because many people could join us and wouldn't have probably joined if we had held this meeting in the European Parliament. When I first heard about the work of Manfred Nowak, thanks to Benoit from Defense for Children International, with whom we organized the event today, I immediately thought that such a comprehensive study would be crucial to collect data, but also to make recommendations about children deprived of liberty. And today, we will mainly focus on the issue of children deprived of liberty in the context of migration. But I would like to take the opportunity to mention as well the different dimensions studied in the general study that will be presented today. And that's also about children detained in the justice administration, children living in prisons with their primary caregivers, institutionalized children, children detained in the context of armed conflicts, and finally, children detained in the context of national security. I'm sure those topics will also be discussed further and on other occasions. Children deprived of liberty remain an invisible and forgotten group in society, notwithstanding the increasing evidence that of these children being in fact victims of further human rights violations. Countless children are placed in inhuman conditions and in adult facilities where they are at high risk of violence, rape, sexual assault, including acts of torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment. Children are being detained at a younger and younger age and held for longer periods of time. The personal costs to these children is immeasurable in terms of destructive impact on their physical and mental development, and also on their ability to lead healthy and constructively lives in society. In the context of pandemic, of course, the effects of detention on children are even more exacerbated. Deprivation of liberty is a deprivation of childhood, and this is why ending detention of children is on top of my political agenda. Together with the Children Rights Intergroup members, we worked on a resolution that was adopted at the European Parliament last November for the 30th anniversary of the UN Convention on Rights of the Child. And we addressed the issue of children held in detention, stating that detention in the context of migration is never in the best interest of the child. This House has been quite vocal over the last years to prevent detention of children and joins many of the recommendations of the study of Mr. Nowak. I'm not the only member of the Children Rights Intergroup today. I will give the floor to my colleague, Fabienne Keller, that will have to leave us in a couple of minutes because she's speaking during the plenary session and she has a rendezvous with Mrs. Merkel on the German presidency of the EU. So Fabienne, before to go on, I'll give you the floor for a couple of minutes.
Hello, Saskia. I'm so glad to be able to be with you today on this important and difficult subject of deprivation of liberty for children. So thank you to give me the floor at the beginning. I'm sorry I wanted to take part to the debate, but I can't make it because, as you said, I have the honor to exchange with the Chancellor, Mrs. Merkel, because she comes in front of the European Parliament to explain her plans concerning the German presidency of the Council of the Union. So it's an important policy moment. And as I will tell on the migration subject, it's important to know what the Germans are going to do and hopefully to push this subject and to take decisions, and a lot of children are concerned by the migration issue. May I share in a few words the fact that I feel concerned by this question of children because I am a mother, actually I am a grandmother also of small babies, but also because I was mayor of the city of Strasbourg, and a municipality takes care of children in the childcare system for the children that are under protection. So I discovered things that were not familiar for me, of children having difficulties and not being loved as much as they should and not accompanied and respected as much as they should. So I think the issue you are touching today is very, very important, because if you don't have all your freedom and if you don't get all the positive energy that helps you grow in a very positive way, then you have this, how can I say, it's lacking to you all your life. So when I looked at the figures, I might say that it's huge. I read that more than 150 million of kids are involved in child labor in the world. That means that it's more than the number of kids in the entire European Union who are working as children up to 7 years. So, and half of those children are in hazardous works, dangerous works. And we know that child labor is very correlated to the poverty of nations. The percentage of children working is higher, the lowest the revenue per capita. Concerning migration, migration is one of my working subjects, and it's one field in which children are deprived of liberty. Two major concerns among others. We have in Europe a high number of unaccompanied minors applying for asylum. Last year, in 2019, more than 17,000 of them applied for asylum in the European Union. And there is a high proportion of children also among the asylum seekers and migrants globally in the EU. For example, in the Greek hotspots, there are around 6,000 children waiting for months months and sometimes for years, and 3/4 of them are under 12-year-olds. They are really kids. You may know that we have an agreement with Turkey. In Turkish camp, where you have the people coming from Syria, refugees, there are about 1.6 million of kids among the asylum seekers. So I'm working as a rapporteur for the Dublin report, which is an important regulation concerning asylum. And it's a cornerstone of our asylum policy. But in this report, I did an implementation report. I stressed some shortcomings where children are deprived of liberty. The first one is the fact that the principle of family unity and reunification is not properly applied in our European asylum procedures. Even though it should be, in theory, at the top of the criteria, it's not applied in practice by the member states. Second, there is the issue, you already touched it, dear Saskia, it's the condition of living of children in the procedures and in some of the reception centers. So the Court of Justice of the EU and the Council of Europe have targeted several member states for not granting sufficient resources to ensure human and adequate reception conditions for children and families. That includes school and health care. Third, we have a big issue concerning unaccompanied minor, because they should be better helped in the procedures. They are young, they don't know anything about the rules and the legal aspects. They should be assisted by special representatives. And we see that there are many delays, so they are young, it's not a good thing for them to be in such a waiting situation. The situation is not acceptable. So we expect a lot from the future Pact on Asylum and Migration, and the Commissioner Ylva Johansson is very involved in the issue of children, so we hope that we will have an important proposal concerning children in asylum and refugee procedure. So thank you so much, Saskia, to have allowed me to tell you a few words, and thank you for organizing this interesting seminar, important seminar, because children are our best in life. So it's so important to protect them and allow them to grow up in, a smooth manner. In French, it's with bienveillance, where whatever they do, they are helped in finding the good way for them to be a good adult and respecting fundamental rights. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Fabienne. Of course, we know your commitment to this issue and to children's rights, and we are grateful if you can address also a few words to Angela Merkel today. And we know that through your work, you're also careful about integrating children's rights in the implementation report on the Dublin regulation. You mentioned it, and I know the Children's Rights Intergroup also proposed a couple of amendments. I hope the shadows will accept them so that we can even reinforce this dimension. So thank you again for being there, and good luck with the plenary session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Apart from the Dublin regulation and the very important Pact on Asylum and Migration that Fabienne also mentioned, we believe that there are also other momentums in our legislative work at the Parliament, where we can address the specific issue of the detention of children, the coming strategy for the rights of the child to be published next year, the proposal on the victims' rights also to be issued by 2022, to name only a few. So this is just a first step, I hope, for many other occasions to really concretely work and integrate this issue in our legislative work at the EU level. We will, just before to give the floor to the very much expected Manfred Nowak, that will present his general study. We have also several guests that will be invited to react to Professor Nowak. We will first have Valeria Setti. Welcome, Valeria, European Commission Coordinator for the Rights of the Child, followed by Joe Becker, who's Advocacy Director at the Children's Rights Division of Human Rights Watch, and finally, Benoit van Keirsbiclk, Director of Defense for Children International Belgium, and also member of the advisory board of the study. But now, without any further ado, I will give the floor to Manfred Nowak for a couple of minutes to present us your study. Manfred, you have the floor.
Thank you, Saskia Bricmont. Thank you, Fabienne Keller, and the Intergroup in general for having invited me. We had planned this first meeting already in March, but then because of COVID-19, we couldn't do it face to face, but I'm very happy that it takes place today. So I would like now to share the screen and the PowerPoint presentation.
While we wait for the full screen, I stupidly omitted to present you properly, Manfred, so I will do so. Professor Nowak is the independent expert leading the United Nations study, a global study on children deprived of liberty. You were professor of international law and human rights in various universities and published more than 600 articles and books. In the past, you've also carried out various expert functions at the United Nations, the Council of Europe, the European Union, and other intergovernmental organizations. And most importantly, you served as United Nations Special Rapporteur on torture, also United Nations expert on enforced disappearances, and as vice chairperson of the management board of the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, the FRA, in Vienna until 2017, and as one of 8 international judges in the Human Rights Chamber of Bosnia-Herzegovina in Sarajevo. I think this is your complete curriculum, or almost. We still don't have a full screen of your presentation.
But can you follow it? Can you follow it? We tried.
I think so. I think we can read it properly. So let's try to do it like that.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Sorry for that. I don't know what happened. We tried to really make it bigger. Yeah, I just wanted to say the UN Global Study on Children Deprived of Liberty is the 3rd one in a row relating to children, after one on children in armed conflict and the impact of armed conflict on children. And in 2006, the study on violence against children, and all led to a follow-up by special representatives of the Secretary General in order to really have an impact in dealing with the issue of child soldiers, but in particular all forms of violence. And the 3rd study is directly following from the 2nd, because deprivation of liberty is a form of structural violence, and the situation in these detention facilities is often highly violent. So I was appointed then. So the General Assembly requested another study in 2014. There's a UN interagency task force, and I was appointed in 2016. And it took us about 3 years to really, on the one hand, raise the funds necessary, but also have a fully inclusive process together with child participation, but in particular, states, UN agencies, non-governmental organizations, and academia to be involved. Why do we need another global study? Because on the one hand, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is very clear. It says that deprivation of liberty of children shall only be a measure of last resort and only for the shortest appropriate period of time. But if you look into the reality, there's a high number of children deprived of liberty, but we didn't know how many. So there was really a lack of reliable statistical data. And that was one of the main aims of the study, to try to get more reliable data so that we know what is the current situation. As you already said, we are trying again. Can you now see the full screen?
Still not, but we can read it.
Okay, so there were 6 focus areas of the global study. So on the one hand, the administration of justice, that means police custody, pretrial detention, imprisonment, children who live with their parents, usually their mothers, in detention in prisons, children deprived of liberty in institutions, all kind of institutions, orphanages, children's homes, big institutions for children that have problems with drug use or alcohol consumption. So there's a broad variety of children in institutions for their educational supervision, but also children with disabilities in particular. Then deprivation of liberty on national security grounds and in armed conflict. And finally, migration-related detention, which will be the main focus of my presentation, but also our discussion afterwards. And then we had 4 cross-cutting areas. On the one hand, the impact on the physical and mental health of children with disabilities, the participation of children also in the way how this global study was put together, and the gender dimension in all its aspects. Now, if we look at the overall numbers, then we found, and these are still conservative numbers, that more than 7 million children are currently deprived of liberty per year. And the biggest number is in relation to institutions. In fact, the number of children in these institutions has dropped also in Europe, in particular also in Central and Eastern Europe, but still it's a very high number that needs more deinstitutionalization. In the administration of justice, we have about 400, a little bit more than 410,000 in pretrial detention and in prison, which is a very conservative estimate based on our data, and about 1 million in police custody. 330,000 children are currently per year in immigration-related detention, and in the context of armed conflict, national security, it's 35,000 and 1,500. Again, very conservative data, many of them also children that are currently detained in the northern part of Syria and in Iraq for their involvement or relations with ISIS, and about 19,000 children living in prisons with their parents, as I said, usually their mothers. Now, on migration-related detention, there are various reasons. As I said, altogether 330,000. There are various justifications, in particular, if children are irregularly entering a country for the preparation of their expulsion or deportation, but also for age assessment reasons, for their own protection, etc. There, our legal conclusion is very clear, and I'm very happy also that the European Parliament had taken that up and also came to the same conclusion, that if we apply this high standard of a measure of last resort, then we come to the conclusion that migration-related detention of children, whether they are unaccompanied children or whether they are together with their families or separated, in every case is never a measure of last resort, because there are always non-custodial solutions available. And in addition, but that's not the main reason, it's also not in the best interest of the child. And that means that we are calling on all states to stop migration-related detention, also because it is particularly harmful to the child's physical and mental health. Of course, there are many refugee children who have already traumatic experiences in their country of origin. They might also have similar experience while they are trying to get to a country that would protect them, so on the way. So these children are in urgent need of psychological, medical treatment, rehabilitation. And the worst thing that can happen to them is if they are again put in detention. So also the argument to say, now it's a whole family, children migrating with their family, in order to keep the families together, because we have to detain the parents, we also have to detain the children. Our answer is very clear. Then you have to find a non-custodial accommodation for the entire family. Of course, we also call on all states to decriminalize irregular entry, and as I said, provide them with non-custodial solutions. Does it now work? Do you see the map? Yeah. If you look at this map, it shows, again, on the basis of the data, in particular, the replies of governments to our questionnaire that was sent out to all UN member states, that we found evidence of about 80 states where we have evidence that they do detain children, and unfortunately, that's also in most of the European and EU member states, with the only exception of Ireland. So Ireland is a green country here in the map, showing that Ireland has actually adopted legislative measures to prohibit migration-related detention of children. But if you look at the map, you see most countries that are no longer detaining children are in Latin America and South America in particular, but also in the southern part of Africa, Madagascar, in Benin, in Japan, in Laos, so in various areas that states have already prohibited migration-related detention of children. In addition to Ireland that I mentioned already, there are others that have reduced migration-related detention. So the numbers, for instance, also in the United Kingdom, of course, it's no longer a member of the European Union, but it really reduced the number quite significantly. On the other hand, if you look in a country like Hungary, that is criminalizing irregular entry, the number was going up very significantly. And countries like Austria, but also the Czech Republic, Finland, Latvia, and Poland have set specific age limits. So in Austria, under the age of 14, no child can be detained. And in the others, it's 15 years. So there are quite a number of initiatives by also EU member states that have reduced the risk and the number of children deprived of liberty. I should also say a few words on the impact of COVID-19 for children detained in migration-related detention or in detention in general. Of course, we all know that the lockdown in all our countries had a particularly negative effect on prisoners, detainees in general, and within the detention facilities on children. So there's a study of Human Rights Watch that shows that at least 79 countries actually responded to the pandemic by releasing detainees, adult detainees, primarily very often the elderly, but only about 20 countries are known to have released children from detention facilities. These include countries like Afghanistan, Chad, Indonesia, South Sudan, etc. And UNICEF has really urged governments, together with the Alliance for Child Protection in Humanitarian Action, to institute a memorandum on children entering detention facilities, so that that's not the best time where children should actually be deprived of liberty. And I feel that since the global study has just been published last November, and I presented it in October to the General Assembly, that I think the COVID-19 pandemic could also be seen as an opportunity to implement these very strict recommendations in relation to migration detention. So to release, that's the recommendation, release all children in immigration detention and provide them with alternative accommodation, alternative protection, of course, irrespective whether they are unaccompanied or not. Of course, it would at the same time significantly reduce the risk that those children are being infected by the coronavirus, but also it would have a positive effect on the prison staff and also their families. I'm already coming to the end. Very quickly, where do we stand? Of course, I did present the study in October to the General Assembly. There was also a resolution in the part of the overall resolution on children's rights, where the study has been recognized, but there was no follow-up mechanism established, which was also with earlier studies like that, that governments need also more time to think about what is the most appropriate form of follow-up. And in the meantime, the UN Interagency Task Force has actually requested its chair, and that's the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Violence Against Children, to take the lead in follow-up, because it is so closely related to violence against children. And follow-up really means working with states, working with UN agencies, with regional organizations like the European Union, in order to ensure that it has an impact, that states are implementing the recommendations. But of course, it was a very, very broad network, and we are keeping this network of about 170 NGOs led by Defense for Children International and Human Rights Watch. But also we have a very, very high-level high-level expert advisory board of some of the main children's rights experts around the world. And I am Secretary General of the Global Campus of Human Rights, as you said already, which is a network of about 100 universities, which was very actively involved in the preparation of the global study, but also in the dissemination efforts. And we were able to actually raise funds so that we can continue. We are currently working on an executive summary that will be soon published in all the UN languages, because the study itself is a very voluminous, it's about 750 pages book, but which of course is also online in interactive version available. And of course, we are counting on the European Union and its various institutions, including the European Parliament, to also assist us or to take action like this webinar today, for which I'm very grateful, in its both internal and external policies. There's still, in relation to migration-related detention, quite much to be done within the EU member states, but it's the same also, of course, for the other areas. But of course, the European Union, with its human rights-oriented external action, is of course also in a very good position to cooperate with other states in their implementation of the recommendations. So the main recommendation is, of course, leave no child behind bars, and of course to give children back their childhood by releasing them by deinstitutionalization, but releasing them also if it's not a measure of last resort from pretrial detention and from prisons, and in particular by stopping the migration-related detention of children. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to discuss any questions or comments that you might have in relation to the global study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manfred. I will jump in to moderate the discussion between the experts that we invited to take part to this roundtable, I would say, even though it's not really a roundtable as such. So I'm Benoit Keirsbiclk, and I'm the director of DCI, Defense for Children International Belgium. I still wanted to show, and I don't know if you can see it on the camera, the size of this study is absolutely impressive. The work that Manfred and all his team and all the supporters of the global study have done around it. So of course you can find it online. You don't have to carry it because it's quite heavy. You can find it online, and the link to the study has been shared. There is also another link where you have a more easy way to get into the study that will allow you to jump from one chapter to another easily. And I know that there is a summary. Of course, there is the report that Manfred presented to the General Assembly that is, I think, something like 15 pages, but there will be an executive summary, something like 65 pages, which will be also translated in several languages. So everyone can find a way to look into it and to try to look especially at the conclusion, the recommendation that are extremely important. So it's my pleasure now to introduce to you, although she has been already introduced to you, Valeria Setti, who is the coordinator on the right of the child for the European Commission. I must say that on the one hand, I think that this presentation of the study is very timely also in the policy of the EU. We have heard that there is a lot of piece of work and also legislation that is under review. And of course, the issue of detention and deprivation of liberty will be included in this discussion, at least we hope. But I also must say that the EU has been very supportive during the whole study, not only financially, but also in providing content, in supporting the whole process. And I think that we have to underline it and to be very grateful to the EU and especially to the Coordination on the Right of the Child, which was extremely active on that. So Valeria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Benoit, for this introduction, and Saskia for the invitation. Thank you, Manfred, for the presentation. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I think I'm very glad that we finally managed to organize this presentation, pandemic permitting. And indeed that this is a study that we have supported in different ways, starting actually back from the 2017 EU Forum on the Rights of the Child, which was dedicated to the issue of children deprived of liberties. That indeed kind of took place a bit at the beginning of this great endeavor. And I want to congratulate Manfred, the team, and all the actors that have been involved in this piece of work, which I think really puts the light on an issue that it's still too often overlooked. Not discussed enough, which is indeed the issue of children deprived of liberty. And now I think today I'm happy to be able to brainstorm also with you how we can, as European Commission, contribute to this much needed follow-up that we've touched upon, and how do we take it from here. I think the study has very, very clear and useful recommendations for different actors, including at EU level, but also at national level. And I think there are a number indeed of kind of avenues through which we can help making sure that the reality that we still have of way too many children behind bar is turned around. I think we are not here to debate the issue of whether children should be detained, because that is very clear from the study and from many other evidence. A child should not be behind bars, whatever the circumstance. And I think we still have a way to go to really put in practice this, and put in practice real, sustainable, child rights-based alternative to detention when this is the case. So I'm happy to also indeed take maybe suggestions on how we could help with our work on this. So as I realize I have a limited amount of time, I would like to touch upon 4 points today. The first related more to EU action in the sphere of criminal justice. The second one more related to EU action in the development and cooperation area. The third one is a consideration regarding detention in migration, and specifically some funding instruments that we have at our disposal. And the fourth one, and I will conclude on that, is indeed looking forward, and a few words on the upcoming strategy on the rights of the child and how that can play a role for the issue that we're discussing today. So in going to my first point, we do have estimates indeed that in the European Union around 1 million children a year are confronted with criminal justice, and that around between 1 and 2% of the prison population in the EU are children. And that of course includes, as Manfred explained before, children who are incarcerated with their parents, most often mothers. It does not include those children, it's a related issue, but I would like to mention it, those children who have a parent or both parents in prison, who are not themselves in prison, but who of course are very much exposed also to many issues related to the deprivation of liberty, even though in the case of their parents. So we do have a legislative instrument at European level that regulates the rights of children suspected or accused in criminal proceedings. And this is a directive that entered into force at national level June last year. So it's been a year of implementation. It's a directive that provides for binding minimum rules on procedural rights for children, and that is based on international law and standards. And this directive, of course, regulates detention and has provisions related to that, and regulates detention as a measure of last resort, foreseeable only for the shortest appropriate period of time, and encourages that all alternative to detention should be taken at national level. So as I said, it's a quite recent directive on which, on whose implementation the Commission is going to report in 2022. So we are soon going to start an evaluation study of the implementation of the directive. And I also would like to mention that in December last year, there were Council conclusions on alternative measures to detention. Conclusions that only minimally mentions children, but where indeed member states are encouraged to put in place alternative to detention, non-custodial measures for specific groups of people, including children, and a series of action to follow up to these Council conclusions are now currently discussed at Commission level. So I hope that soon we'll also be able to maybe share more details on further initiatives that within the criminal justice area we are going to undertake with a specific aim, especially of promoting and helping member states setting up non-custodial measures for children. Now, my second point was more relating to the action of the EU in the development and cooperation field and with partner countries. I think here it is important to say that the broader aim of EU action is to engage with partner country in a journey to reform their judicial systems, to work with and within the communities to change the norms and the attitudes also related to children in conflict with the law, more than let's say, providing goods and services to children in detention, but really to engage with partner countries in a longer term, let's say, reform of the justice systems. And here, in the last 5 years, more than 75 million euros have been engaged in more than 50 countries, through partnership with UN agencies as well as international non-governmental organizations for projects related to children in conflict with the law and to promote legal reforms that would embed a strong child rights dimension. So it's an area of work where already quite a lot has been done and where we are going to continue working, and that the outcome of this study will very much and are very much informing. The third point that I wanted to make relates more to the issue of children in migration. And I think you have had the pleasure of having Commissioner Johansson on many webinars also organized by the Intergroup in these past weeks, touching upon the need to embed a strong child rights dimension in the upcoming pact. So that is very much under development. I think we've heard from Manfred very clearly that the study indeed comes to the conclusion that detaining children for administrative purposes in migration is never in the best interest of the child, because there are always non-custodial measures that are available. I think what we really see in practice is that this is not necessarily the case in terms of how member states are not setting up in place, not using enough, not exploring alternatives to detention for children in migration. I think this study will help. We've heard a few promising practices highlighted also in the context of EU member states, but I think much more needs to be done on really promoting alternative to detentions in the context of migration. And here, just as a anecdote or a food for thought, we have over the 2018 and 19 had 2 consecutive calls under the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund, set up with the specific aim of encouraging alternative care for unaccompanied children, as well as alternative measures to detention, non-custodial measures. And we had an overwhelming number of proposals related to alternative care and almost close to 0 proposals related to promoting alternatives to detentions. We were quite surprised by it, and indeed it's something that I think further confirms maybe the big room for improvement, the big need that there is to work on this topic. The fourth point.
Valeria, 1 more minute.
Yes, I will conclude by saying that we are working towards the adoption of a new strategy for the rights of the child at European level. It will be adopted in the first quarter of next year, and it will contain both concrete actions that the Commission will commit to undertake within these mandates, as well as recommendations for member states. We are launching in the second week of August our open public consultation in view of gathering the general public and stakeholders' input for the strategy. We will be organizing our next forum on the rights of the child at the end of September to feed in into our preparation for the strategy. And so I just want to conclude by saying that this is a good, I think, occasion or a good channel for us to take some of the recommendations of the study in our work, and that I also take the opportunity to inform every participant to this webinar of these consultation possibilities coming up, so that you won't, hopefully won't miss it. Yeah, I will conclude here, and of course we can discuss further on if there's time for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valeria, and also to reminding us all this legal framework and the opportunities also to use this study in the frame of the coming agenda of the EU. We will be able to come back because there are a few questions that we can deal with later on during the discussion time. But without further delay, I will give the floor to Jo Becker. She was already introduced, so I won't say much about her, except the fact that she's also a member of the advisory board of the global study, and a very active one. And she has been in charge, particularly on one chapter of, it's even a double chapter combined of the study. So she had the double of work, more on children in armed conflict and children deprived of liberty in the frame of security. But she's also co-convener, it has been said, but co-convener of the NGO panel of the global study. And we should say that there is 170 NGO that have been following and supporting this global study from the very beginning, from the start, the very start and the call for the global study. And so that's also a quite amazing achievement to have so many NGOs of all the world and working in different topics that are have been involved in the study in one way or another. So, Jo, it's my pleasure to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Benoit. And I want to thank Saskia Bricmont and the Intergroup on the Rights of the Child, and also DCI for sponsoring this event and the opportunity to present to you today. As Benoit mentioned, I'm Jo Becker. I'm the Children's Rights Advocacy Director for Human Rights Watch. And together with DCI, Human Rights Watch has been co-chairing the NGO panel for the global study. The panel was established in 2013, and as mentioned, there are 170 organizations, national, local, and international, that have been involved for nearly 7 years now to support Professor Nowak, to engage in the study, and certainly now to carry out its recommendations and disseminate its findings. So first I want to say that the NGOs are really grateful to Professor Nowak for his leadership, his hard work in carrying out this study. It's so important and has highlighted that millions of children worldwide are detained, deprived of liberty, often illegally, often unnecessarily, and at great cost to their health and their future. The study also shows that non-custodial measures produce much better outcomes for children, for their families, and for society overall. And we really hope that the global study will prompt every country to review their policies and their practices and work to dramatically decrease the number of children who are locked up or otherwise confined. Today, I want to speak particularly about the urgency presented by COVID-19 in addressing children's deprivation of liberty. Children in detention and in institutions are particularly vulnerable to infection because of their close proximity, frequent overcrowding, and a higher incidence of underlying health conditions. Social distancing in these situations is often impossible. Access to water, sanitation, basic medical services is often poor. And we've already seen the results. In some juvenile detention centers here in the United States, for example, I'm based in New York, more than half of children have tested positive for COVID-19. Manfred mentioned that in early April, UNICEF and the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action issued guidance regarding children in detention. They urged governments to institute a moratorium on any new children entering detention facilities, to release children who could be safely released, and to act to protect the health and safety of those that need to remain in detention. So we've seen some positive action, some countries, municipalities releasing children or no longer accepting children into detention. But what we've found is that many governments are treating children in detention as an afterthought of their COVID-19 response, if they consider them at all. Manfred mentioned Human Rights Watch's survey in May regarding releases from detention in response to COVID-19. I should clarify that this was in regard to detention in the justice system, not immigration detention. But as Manfred mentioned, Human Rights Watch surveyed global media reports to track releases around the world. And we found that at least 79 countries were releasing adult detainees as part of their COVID-19 response, but that we could only find 20 that had released children. Some countries like Afghanistan, Chad, Indonesia, South Sudan explicitly included children in the categories of detainees to be considered for release, but sadly in most countries, children were not mentioned at all. Even when authorities try to protect children in detention from the virus, they often create other problems. For example, in some facilities, children are now restricted to their cells for 23 or more hours a day, which amounts to solitary confinement. UN experts have recommended that solitary confinement should never be used for children and that it can constitute torture. And yet this is what's happening for many children. We're focusing particularly on migration today. So I want to say that when it comes to immigration detention, we've also seen children left out of the COVID-19 response. For example, the United Kingdom seems to have taken fairly quick positive steps in the case of adults in immigration detention, releasing many within weeks of the onset of the pandemic, but they failed to do the same for children. The Howard League reported that in mid-May, very little was being done for children in immigration detention, and that approximately 750 children were in virtual 24-hour lockdown. We're particularly concerned about the situation in Greece. On the Aegean Islands, over 30,000 asylum seekers and migrants are trapped in overcrowded reception centers, including at least 1,200 unaccompanied children. The camps are at over 6 times capacity, with extremely poor sanitation and access to water. For the general population in Greece, COVID-related restrictions were lifted at the beginning of May, but the camps on the islands have been on lockdown since mid-March. In addition, over 200 unaccompanied migrant children are detained in police stations under a protective custody regime. They're often held for weeks or even months in small, overcrowded and unsanitary police cells where some children are forced to sleep 2 to a bed or on the floor with inadequate access to hygiene items, running water, toilets, showers. And finally, since March, because of COVID-19, the government has been arbitrarily detaining newly arrived migrants and asylum seekers, including children, in cramped, unsanitary reception centers, supposedly on health grounds, but without any evidence that any of them have actually contracted COVID-19. Of course, Hungary has detained children in prison-like camps. France has detained hundreds in mainland France, most often in airport detention centers, and thousands of children on Mayotte in the Indian Ocean. And as I think Ms. Keller pointed out, in several cases in Europe, the European Court of Human Rights has found that conditions of immigration have violated children's rights. And of course, as we've mentioned, UN experts have stated that immigration detention is never in the best interests of the child. Because this is a European Parliament briefing, I focused mostly on European examples so far, but of course, the United States has distinguished itself in its horrific treatment of migrant and asylum-seeking children, detaining thousands in cages along the border, separating them from their families, denying them even the most basic items like soap or toothpaste. Currently, the United States is detaining approximately 1,000 unaccompanied children, and US authorities have failed to take basic precautions to protect them from COVID-19, including comprehensive testing for the virus, providing masks, practicing social distancing. The administration has also expelled nearly 40,000 people, including 2,000 unaccompanied children. This is ostensibly to contain the virus and prevent it from entering the United States. But in reality, this is denying children their rights for asylum and subjects them to the risk of traffickers and persecution in their home countries. One very small bit of good news is that 2 weeks ago, a federal judge ordered several hundred children released from family detention because of outbreaks of COVID-19 in these facilities. But the fact of the matter is that these children never should have been detained to begin with. So whether it's in detention in the juvenile justice system or immigration detention, COVID response measures have often left children behind or even worse off than they were before. And I think the current situation underlines the importance and the urgency of the study's recommendations that immigration detention always be avoided for children, and that in the juvenile justice system, detention always be a measure of absolute last resort after all other options are exhausted. Before I conclude, I just want to highlight one additional issue related to the pandemic, which is our approach to children who are orphaned by COVID-19. As of today, more than 540,000 people have died worldwide from the virus, and we know that that number will only continue to grow. As it does, many children will be left without one or both of their parents. We saw that during the 30 years of the HIV epidemic, millions of children were orphaned, and the response by many governments and private donors was to build orphanages, creating an orphanage boom in many countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. But of course, decades of research and the global study have shown that this is a misguided response, that children living in orphanages are often deprived of liberty, and without a family environment, they are at greater risk of impaired cognitive, physical, emotional, and social development. With COVID-19, we need to make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. And instead of building more orphanages, governments should invest in expanding extended family care, foster networks to ensure that these children are raised in family-based care. So thanks for your attention. I look forward very much to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Joe. Indeed, the situation in the United States is certainly a very bad example for the rest of the world at many different levels. When it comes to detention for migration reason, we also have a lot of specific issues dealing with this. We have the age assessment. Very often children arrive without having a proper identity. Very often there is a doubt about the family links between the child and the parents, so the family unity, which is very important to guarantee it's maybe at stake. And also, when it comes to the definition of deprivation of liberty, there are many places that are not seen or presented as detention or deprivation of liberty, but de facto it is deprivation of liberty, and I think that the study shows it very clearly. Just to highlight possibly a more positive note, it shows that it's possible to get rid of detention. The situation of Belgium. In Belgium, there is no more children in detention for migration reason for about 10 years. And this is the result of the fight that NGOs and lawyers have done during many, many years, reaching out to national courts, but also to international courts. And there was an attempt 2 years ago to reintroduce detention of children with their families, and it has happened during a few months, and it has shown that there is detention is used in very wrong legal terms. So we should also highlight that, and not as a measure of last resort, and certainly not for the shortest period of time. And it has also highlighted all the consequences that detention has on the mental health and the development of the children. So this is also something that is very worrying, and it happens in most of the country. Even a very short detention has consequences on children. We know also that detention of migrant children happens very often in places like transit zone, at the border, in places where there is no condition, no living condition, as it has been highlighted by Joe previously. My final comment after those two interventions would be also to highlight the importance of monitoring system of all places where children are deprived of liberty. It should be in all places where there is deprivation of liberty, but there is a need to approach deprivation of liberty of children in a very specific manner. And I would say that the Council of Europe has together with DCI Belgium, developed a practical guide on monitoring places where migrant children are deprived of liberty. There should be also a complaint mechanism in place, keeping in mind that children usually do not speak the language, do not have access to information, and they have specific needs that are usually not taken into account in their specific situation. So this is a quick addition and reaction to what has been said. And I would like to ask Saskia to, if you would have something to add at this stage, and if you want to comment what the previous speaker has said.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for the different, very interesting interventions. Yes, I would like to comment. Also on what Valeria Setti said, and of course we have an ally when we talk to Valeria and her very comprehensive view on the situation globally of children's rights, and more specifically on the issue we are talking about today. I think the situation is evolving also at the EU level. We have a very clear position from the European Parliament, and the Commission is also willing to move forward on this issue, and the real momentum will be the strategy on children's rights. But still, there are different interpretations, I think, of the best interest of the child, because I heard also Commissioner Johansson saying that the best interest of the child should always be taken into account also in detention. But what is needed is to recognize that detention is not in the best interest of the child, and so that we forbid detention of children in any context, and particularly in a migration context. So I think we still have work there to be done so that everybody understands what it means, the best interest of the child, and what it means as consequences for children to be detained. Because I think a lot of people do not really realize what it implies. And that's maybe a first step also to bring public awareness and public opinion to what it means to be deprived of liberty for a child, what are the concrete consequences on mental health, on their physical health, on their development. And of course, people are sensitive when it comes to children's rights, but then to go a step further and really take stand against deprivation of liberty and detention in the context of migration is another step. But I'm trustful, and I think we are going the right way. And this global study also, it's a presentation here at the EP level, but we could think about having more presentations also in our member states, and try to work also with the national MPs, so that in the very many countries concerned also in Europe still by children detention, we could try to push the agenda and go further in the national legislation, because that's one of the main issues we face. It's that member states have to take the decision and adapt their legislation in order to end detention of children. So I will leave it here for now, I think, because of course, many things still can be said about it, but I think we maybe can take a minute or two to take questions. I see in the chat that someone was asking if there exists a release of the monitoring of the responses that have been given to COVID-19, and I see that the link to the Human Rights Watch report findings has been communicated in the chat. So if people are interested, they can go to the chat and click there. The study has also been shared in the chat. I see also there is a question to as well Manfred Nowak as Valeria Setti from Rachel. The question is, according to her information, Austria charges a daily rate for having an electronic tag instead of imprisonment. Is it true? And do other countries also make a charge? This raises questions about discrimination in relation to those who cannot afford to pay. Is someone of you willing to answer this question? Manfred? Go ahead.
Thanks for the question to Rachel Poet. Yes, it's true. Most of the Council of Europe and EU member states do not charge. Austria does charge for, and they are justifying it by saying that if people are in house arrest with electronic monitoring, that this monitoring costs a lot of money, and that should be, if possible, compensated by the prisoners themselves. To my knowledge, it is a weight of 22 euros per day. I know of, but of course there are probably more, but the UK and also Sweden have a similar system where they are charging the prisoners to actually compensate these costs themselves. And of course, you're right that there is a problem that, of course, if people cannot afford it, but that is, in the Austrian case, it's exempted. So only for those prisoners who actually can afford to pay for that.
Thank you. There's also a question about the repatriation of children from camps in Syria. This is also an issue I've been following, but maybe Joe Becker can answer this.
Yeah, thanks very much. This is a real concern that thousands of children from foreign countries remain detained in camps in northeast Syria for alleged association with ISIS. Many of these children are under the age of 6 years old. They had no choice about either being taken to Syria or being born to foreign parents there. Our figures are currently that there are about 14,000 non-Iraqi foreigners from about 60 different countries that are still being held in these camps in Syria. There are at least 20 countries that have repatriated their citizens, at least some of them, and those include the European countries of Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Norway, and the UK. France repatriated 10 children as recently as June 21st. But we're very concerned that most countries are not doing nearly enough to bring children home with their families. I think the leaders have really been Russia and Kazakhstan, and other Central American countries that have taken hundreds of their citizens back. But there are others, like outside of Europe. Canada, for example, has 47 citizens in these camps, including 26 children, and has not taken a single one home. So I think we can see, better steps by all countries in responding to this urgent situation as the conditions in these camps only deteriorate further. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. And yes, this is also an issue where the answer at the EU level is it's a member states' competence, and governments have to decide on the repatriation of those children when it comes to the European children. Of course, And for the moment, we are stuck in a situation where there's no global decision to repatriate them, and we don't have a proper EU answer to this issue, neither in clear violation with the children's rights. We have another question, and then I will give the opportunity back to Manfred to have a general intervention about the different interventions that we've heard, and last word to Benoit. So the next question to Valeria, Setti and Manfred Nowak is: children deprived of liberty in the context of migration remains a challenging issue in Europe, despite a number of decisions of the court that condemned many countries, including France, Belgium, Austria, and Italy. Children continue to be detained in Europe. Some countries use the term retention, which is in practice the same as detention. Are current steps and ongoing initiatives taking into account that aspect? So who wants to answer first? Valeria?
Yes, I was putting my camera and my microphone back. Thank you. I think indeed it's what we've heard throughout the webinar today, and I do agree it remains a challenging issue. I think detention is widely practiced, even indeed when it isn't a measure of last resort and not for the shortest possible period of time. And I think what I was saying at the very beginning is that we are we have a long way to go in turning this reality around and really making non-custodial measures a reality, a common practice, not only a good practice, but a common practice. So we've mentioned already that work around the pact is in the pipeline, although many things are still, developments are still ongoing, and that could be an opportunity for indeed working on this, but it's not it's not something I can already share with certainty at this stage.
Thank you, Valeria. Manfred, I'll give you the floor back to answer this specific question and more globally to react to the different interventions. And then Benoit will conclude this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, you said yourself that it's kind of strange that for such a long period of time that this issue has been actually overlooked. I think it's one of the most overlooked violations of the rights of the child. I mean, the Convention on the Rights of the Child is already in force for 30 years. So there would have been much time for European or other states to actually really take this seriously. And if I mean, you were talking about the best interest of the child, which of course is a more difficult concept to be applied. But if you look at Article 37, I mean, deprivation of liberty for adults, there are various reasons, and international law allows, of course, in the criminal justice system, but also in many other areas. But for children, a measure of last resort actually means, in principle, you should never detain children. So in every individual case, we would have to show that there is no non-custodial solution that would also actually fit the purpose. That's a very strict standard that would have to need to be applied. I'm not saying there might be cases in the criminal justice system where a child is particularly dangerous, has committed a very serious crime, etc. It will probably not be possible also, but even there, I think we have to apply diversion. We can see in so many countries that it is possible. So also Europe has done quite a lot to establish special child justice systems with child judges, etc. And that means also diversion. And that is also a relation to one of the questions that were posed on the chat. It is, of course, only possible if the child welfare system is functioning well. So I think primarily we have to start to support the families. Primarily, children should be raised by their families. There's a very high percentage of children in orphanages that still have at least one parent. But the parent is not in a position, is too poor, whatever, to take care of a child with a disability, for instance. So primarily we should start to support families, and then we should support family type settings, whether it is foster families or whether it's other small group homes in the community, etc. So there's always this kind of alternative, even for children that are in conflict with the law, but much more for children that are simply in institutions because for whatever reason, one feels that that is the better way for the educational supervision of children. Again, that's why I said deinstitutionalization is a very important matter. And for migration-related detention, we see in at least 24 countries, including Ireland, that it is possible to manage migration regulation without detaining children. And you see also in these other countries that have taken steps, you can reduce it very significantly. You can stop migration-related detention of children if there is the necessary political will. Now, finally, I'm very grateful to Valeria for informing us about all the different ways how the Commission would like to contribute, and also in developing the new EU strategy on the rights of the child. And I would, of course, be extremely happy to be involved as much as it is possible, but also to really put a particular focus on the deprivation of liberty. And again, within the deprivation of liberty of children, then in the migration-related detention. So in my opinion, that's the kind of number one, because there we have a very clear legal requirement: stop immigration detention of children, and really build up the necessary non-custodial solutions. And the second would be continue or intensify deinstitutionalization. And the third one, certainly intensify the diversion of children from the criminal justice system and to transfer to the child welfare system, and strengthening the child welfare system in all EU member states. That's a few of my comments in relation to what you and others have said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manfred. We are reaching almost the end of this webinar. It was extremely interesting, and I think that we have a lot of information now. There is still many questions that have been raised in the chat, and we will try to answer them later on, and also through a report of this this webinar. I would like, as a conclusion, because of the time it's very short, to emphasize the need for a follow-up of this study. This study is not and should not be seen as a one-shot. It has to be follow-up. It has taken a lot of time, a lot of energy, and we have evidences now of the consequences of detention on children. And of course, nobody wants to raise children who will have faced problems all their lives because they have been detained during their childhood. For this, we need a mechanism at international level to ensure that there is a coordination, that all the actors that should be involved in the follow-up are properly following up the recommendation. All the UN agencies, the regional bodies, of course at the European level we have the EU, but we have also the Council of Europe, which is also focusing on deprivation of liberty and has done a lot of work, among other, on standard settings. But we need also a proper follow-up at national level. 2 years ago, there was a collection of data in all countries of the world, so we have a lot of data there. on how many children are detained, in which condition, for how long, and we need to use this data as a baseline. The objective is to reduce the number of children, to find alternatives, and to ensure that less children are detained. So at the end of the day, what we want also is to change attitude towards children and towards deprivation of liberty, and to try not to see a migrant as a migrant, but first of all as a child who needs protection, who needs support, and who needs good condition, living condition. For this, I think that one of the objectives of this webinar was awareness raising on the study itself. We need to know the study, we need to know the conclusion and the recommendation of the study, and look at them to see how we can implement them. And for instance, at national level, we would like every state to develop a plan of action. What will be done by each state to ensure that there is a plan to reduce the number of children in detention? It cannot be done from one day to another, and it has to be done properly to ensure that it's not just opening doors and letting children in the street. We need to have proper mechanisms to take the children on board. We need to continue to count the children and to see how many children are still in detention, what are the progress made, and where are we going in that regard. At international level, we count very much on the support of the special representative of the Secretary General on Violence Against Children, Najat Mjid. She has been committed since the very beginning of her mandate on the study. She entered in the game at the end of the study when the study was almost finished. But she's really dedicated to the follow-up, and she is willing also to coordinate a follow-up mechanism, which would make sense and put this global study at the same level as the previous one, which has a specific international follow-up mechanism. This seems for me a very important achievement. And we will need all the actors that have been involved in the study. Of course, the academic world should continue evaluating the situation, trying to find out what are the best ways to deal with children in all the settings that we have highlighted in the study. We need, of course, the NGO, and in so many fields and in so many countries, NGOs are working and are doing a very important work to not only to monitor, to ensure that there is someone looking at the children, reaching out to the children in detention, but also proposing and setting up a solution. We need, of course, regional bodies and the EU in supporting member states in developing these plan of action, also supporting specific pilot project to show that things can progress in the good direction. And of course, we need politicians and members of the European Parliament and of course the Intergroup, I'm sure will continue to follow up, to continue raising the awareness on the topic, and really on a permanent basis recall that we as a society should not think that detention is a project for children and a way to treat children in any kind of settings. So having said that, I would like to finish by thanking very much the Intergroup on Children's Rights, which is, I mean, it's very important for us to continue working together with the Intergroup. Our objectives are the same, and we should continue working together. And in particular, Saskia, who is co-chair of this Intergroup, and with whom we have established an excellent dialogue, and I'm sure that we will continue. So thank you, Saskia, and to all your colleagues too, who did a wonderful job in setting up this webinar. Thank you, Manfred, for continuing believing that this study will change the life of the children, and you know, traveling here and there, sometimes by video, but traveling and presenting this study. I think that everyone feels that you are still, and you will continue to be committed to implement the recommendation. We count on you. Thank you to all the speakers, Valeria, Joe, and also the other MEP that presented her work, and hopefully she was able to also raise the issue with in the dialogue with the German presidency. And I would also like to thank all the participants. We had, I think, around 80 participants, which is much more that we would have had if we organized it in a meeting room of the European Parliament. So that's even better. And I'm sure that with this webinar, we will be able to continue reaching out to more people. We will publish it or make it available for more people, and we will use it as an awareness raising tool for the future. So thank you so much. I hope that I didn't forget anyone in my conclusion, but if I did, please forgive me, and thank you for the commitment of all of you.
Thanks to you, Benoit. Thank you, everybody, and be sure we stay committed. And I also want to thank my team working in the backstage, because it's, even if it's remotely, it's quite an organization. So thank you, and thank you, of course, to all the speakers. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.